Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Merage School of Business Virtual Speaker Series. My name is Cynthia Rood, and I'm the Executive Director of the Merage School Career Center. Tonight's discussion is brought to you by the Merage School's Leadership Experience and Development for Success program, also known as LEADS. Founded in 2018, LEADS offers our undergraduate business students the opportunity to participate in professional development, mentoring workshops, and networking events with Merage School alumni and community leaders. Academic and community partnerships like LEADS are critical in today's business environment to build success skills like critical thinking, resiliency, collaboration, and curiosity. Started by Dean's Advisory Board member and Merage School adjunct professor Steve Cook, and founding executive mentors Kimberly Rausch, Ken Tedhope, and Karen Seeley, LEADS has grown in just 3 years into a vibrant leadership development program that has served more than 100 students before they enter the workforce. In fact, just prior to this event, our LEADS students were leading discussions with mentors and community members about tonight's topic. To give you a small peek into the LEADS program, I'd like to play a short video that highlights the impact LEADS is having on our future leaders.
LEADS has provided me with the framework to not only build relationships on campus, but off campus. It's also immensely helped me with my career development and my development as a future business professional.
The LEADS program has not only given me opportunities to gain valuable career advice and to be mentored by business professionals, but also to connect with other passionate and hardworking students here at Merage. I have gained a community here at LEADS that supports both my personal and professional growth.
Now to introduce our distinguished speakers is LEADS member Kate Davidson. She has deepened her educational experience at the Merage School by getting involved in the LEADS program, business careers, and the entertainment club, and she's both a DJ and music director at the UCI radio station KUCI. Kate will be graduating in June and continuing her business journey in the Venture for America Fellowship Program, which is fitting given that Kate has run her own vintage clothing shop, Good Fruit, since 2015. Thank you for joining us, Kate.
All right, thank you, Cynthia, and welcome everyone to our discussion. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our hosts and distinguished guests for tonight's discussion. Our first host is Merage School Dean Ian Williamson. Dr. Williamson was appointed Dean of the UCI Paul Merage School of Business January 1st of this year. Prior to joining the Merage School, he served as Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of Commerce at the Wellington School of Business and Government at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Dean Williamson is a globally recognized expert in the area of human resource management. His award-winning research examines the impact of talent pipelines on organizational and community outcomes. Dr. Williamson has assisted executives in over 20 countries across 6 continents to enhance firm operational and financial outcomes, improve talent recruitment and retention, enhance firm innovation, and understand the impact of social issues on firm outcomes. Dean Williamson's research has been published in leading academic journals and covered by leading media outlets across the world. He also has been recognized for his innovative approaches to business education, including multiple teaching awards and an induction into the PhD Project Hall of Fame for his efforts to enhance diversity in academia and the business world. Welcome, Dean Williamson. Our second host is Mark Percy, president of the CEO Leadership Alliance of Orange County. Mr. Percy has served in this role since 2019, where the mission is to grow Orange County into a top-tier innovation hub within America. Prior to his role with the CEO Leadership Alliance, Mr. Percy served as a philanthropic advisor to individuals and families making significant investments to positively impact education, healthcare, and other areas of common purpose. He assumed many roles to benefit his long-term clients, including executive director of the K Family Foundation, board member of the Marvin Buzz Oates Charitable Foundation, chair of the Workforce Development Committee of the OC STEM Initiative based at UC Irvine, and executive director of the OC Excellent Public Schools Initiative based at Chapman University. Mr. Percy also has held executive positions within the consulting sector, empowering leading U.S. companies to expand business in emerging market economies. Today, he continues to service as a board chair of Dreams for Schools, promoting education equity by bridging STEM gaps in elementary and middle school institutions. Welcome, Mr. Percy. And finally, I'm honored to introduce our distinguished speaker tonight, Reza Jahangiri. Mr. Jahangiri is an American entrepreneur who is passionate about creating purpose-driven businesses. He is the CEO of American Advisors Group, the nation's leader in reverse mortgage lending, and is committed to helping seniors improve their retirement outcomes through the responsible use of their home equity. Mr. Jahangiri is the past chair of the National Reverse Mortgage Lenders Association. He is also the co-founder and chair of Willow International, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human trafficking at the source in Uganda. Additionally, Mr. Jahangiri leads the strategic planning efforts for Gen Next, a network of leaders focused on tackling the key generational challenges of our time. In 2017, Mr. Jahangiri received Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year Award in the Financial Services category in Orange County. The following year, he was honored with an Excellence in Entrepreneurship Award by the Orange County Business Journal, and he continues to support a variety of organizations through board and leadership positions, including Octane, CEO Leadership Alliance, UCI CEO Roundtable, Pacific Symphony, and the Claire Trevor School of the Arts. Welcome, Dean Williamson, Mr. Percy, and Mr. Jahangiri.
Thank you very much, Kate, for that fantastic introduction. I really appreciate that. And congratulations in advance on completing your degree, and all the best with the next steps that you're taking going forward. So why don't we jump right into it? Reza, maybe you might want to give a little more background about yourself, if you like.
Great, thanks, Dean Williamson. Kate, what an exciting introduction. Thank you for having me here, guys. I'm a UCI undergrad alum as well, too, so it's very special to be here with all of you. So my quick background, my family, they were Iranian refugees. They left, my parents left in '78. I was a couple months old, I'm 42 years old. I grew up here locally in Orange County, been here virtually my entire life. Attended UC Irvine, like I said, for undergrad, went to law school in Los Angeles at Loyola Law while I was starting a healthcare business. So I was going to law school part-time. I was accidentally introduced to the concept of a reverse mortgage, and I just was obsessed with, digging in and learning more about it because no one knew what it was. And the people that did, the handful of people, there was a stigma associated with it. They didn't think great things of it. So the more I dug in, I realized that there's a lot of utility to this product and that it potentially solved a social issue or helped solve a social issue against the backdrop of a growing senior demographic that was having bad outcomes in retirement. So right now in our country, about 54% of people, when they retire, they have a lower standard of living. Their quality of life goes down. And the average cost of retirement in our country is about $750,000, and the average savings is $17,000. So is the picture that this paints, there's more and more reliance on Social Security and entitlements. And while people are living longer, they don't really have the means to live a quality life. So the issue we're addressing is this retirement crisis with activating this $8 trillion of home equity that seniors hold that's historically been underutilized and not really be thought of as a retirement planning asset. So the company that I founded about 17 years ago, AAG, is now, as Kate mentioned, the leading home equity for retirement platform. We have about 30% of our market. There's about 1,650 employees, a lot of them in Orange County, because the business was started here. And we're now moving in to a broader focus on retirement, addressing healthcare, medical, and insurance needs of seniors that are being undermet right now.
So, I mean, one, that's just, we can go on and on and on about the fascinating aspects about that. But before I dive into that question, so I will come back to that. But before I jump into that, I just maybe want to take a bigger picture on this. And in your bio, it says you are an entrepreneur who is passionate about creating purpose-driven businesses. And you alluded a little bit to that in your statement just now. But I would think it'd be really helpful if maybe you can explain to individuals what you mean by purpose-driven business. And related to that, another point that I know you're quite passionate about is generational leadership. And maybe you just talk about what purpose-driven business is or is not in your mind, and what is general leadership, and why should we care about either of those?
Great, thanks, Dean Williamson. I'll tackle that by going into my whole progression when it comes to purpose, against a quick little backdrop I gave you of my business experience. I identify with being an entrepreneur, like many on this. Hopefully many people on this Zoom are heading in that direction as well too. But initially, my reason and purpose, I had a lot of raw ambition, but when I look back, a lot of it was rooted in fear because of family history of financial up and downs, and proving I was good enough to myself because of familial and societal values that may have been a bit shallow. And I think when I look back, I actually thank the whole fear dynamic, because for me, a lot of people it prevents from pursuing entrepreneurship. For me, it fueled me in activating. And so as my company was growing, I realized that all the BS is why I really worked hard early on, but it was not going to make me happy or take me to the next level. And I really thought, I sat down 8 or 9 years ago and I said, what really is fulfilling to me? What do I value? And I realized solving complex problems with a team that I loved and a team that I respected, which could then lead to impacting how millions of people approach retirement. It didn't have to be retirement, just solving a complex problem that benefited society actually gave me meaning and made me very happy. So that anchoring and purpose ties to your question, Dean Williamson, about generational leadership and purpose-driven organizations and purpose-driven leaders. Nothing wrong with, like I said, money, of course, self-interest, capitalism, money, that's done a lot of good. And it activates a lot of people to work hard. And those things I mentioned, the more superficial societal values of status, proving you're good enough, all of that can actually be a catalyst. But my view is the world is increasing in complexity and uncertainty. A lot of it is due to, of course, the technological advancement and information access these days. And I think the systemic mistrust that exists is one of the biggest societal issues. Millennials and Gen Z, they are something like 19% of them think that society will do right by them right now. So social trust is arguably for the younger generations at an all-time low. And it is a generational dynamic. There are some of the older generations that the trust is still there, but it is down right now. And I think going into the root of it here, true societal evolution, which will lead to better human experience for those to come, comes from generational leadership. So what is it? That was a long-winded setup for what is generational leadership. Generational leaders are people that value what world they leave behind to the next generation. They take the long view. So focused on generational improvement 25, 50, 75 years from now. And I always say it's going from your vertical of if you're focused on self-interest and money and success, improving yourself and succeeding in your vertical, it's going horizontal. It's branching your wings out and learning how you could have more meaning and more impact. David Brooks calls it the second mountain. And I believe generational leaders connect their sense of self to their business and to society at large as well too. And generational leaders are ones I feel that when they're behind an organization, nonprofit, for-profit, they run purpose-driven organizations. So they have a sense of doing something greater than themselves, and they align their companies and their people to align around that greater purpose. In every organization, purpose is used pretty loosely these days. There's a lot of argument that right now, is it a fad, or is ESG investing a fad right now? But every organization has purpose. Purpose is a reason, right? And historically, making money for shareholders was the highest order reason companies existed. I think what's happening now is leaders and companies are realizing that the capital P purpose, the more noble, greater good, and using your influence for good is really changing the game. And so it doesn't mean making money should not be a focus. I just don't think it should be the end all be all. And I believe generational leaders that are behind these purpose-driven organizations are positioned to address some of society's most challenging problems. I personally don't think we could rely on government to solve all of our problems. And I'll end with, I do think generational leaders can be in government, and it's actually very needed right now to kind of cut through the partisanship and self-preservation and focus on a values first and then issues approach to addressing some of our toughest problems.
So you brought up government and you thought about more broader things, and I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about what do you see as the role of institutions more broadly in thinking about generational leadership. And obviously companies can be institutions, not-for-profit can be institutions, but if you think about the thing that carries over the idea from a generation to the other is actually an institution. It's not the person, because we don't make it that long. But what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about where we are today and how the audience that we have today, that generation that's behind us, should be thinking about their role in developing institutions?
That's a great, big question. As you said, institutions outlive us. A way to leave a legacy and to make sure you do have generational impact is through the distribution of that is through institutions. And I think, there's a lot of examples of need in the world and examples of issues right now. Mental health, homelessness, rise of authoritarianism, terrorism, cultural wars, environmental strain, economic mobility, you could go on and on. The breakdown of trust, I think, being one of the biggest ones right now. And I think people that choose their issues and find what they're passionate about, going through the introspective journey of discovering what they value, can really leave their mark through getting organizations aligned around greater good. And I think, again, I don't want to be knocking capitalism. I'm a big believer of democracy and capitalism in our model and in creating human alignment for to activate and innovate and make money and prosper. But I do think pairing that in an institution with a greater constituency than the traditional, in the private sector shareholder model is becoming critical. And this goes, Dean Williamson, in the whole institutional realm, led by a generational leader, a purpose-driven leader, goes to the trust issue. I don't think we could regain this trust very easily right now with the amount of information barraging us. Jonathan Haidt talks about the information age and social media, what it's doing to Gen Z and millennials. And I believe truly it is a very scary sword that cuts both ways here. I think we have to address the underlying trust issue from showing that our leaders and institutions care more. They care about their employees. They care about their customers more. They care about the environment more. They care about the impact of what they do, and really rebalance and prove and show that they do care to gain the trust of the younger generations to kind of shift the course of this country so we can all align and tackle our issues collectively.
Reza, if I could follow up on Dean Williamson's question in terms of the institutions and the lack of trust in institutions, let's talk a little bit about CEO organizations, because CLA is new to Orange County. There are CEO-led organizations around the country now, and we're actually in discussions with them, learning, what we can do together and learn from each other. But in terms of the difficult problems facing society, looking long-term at problems, business leaders are typically very good at that and understanding, putting a strategy in place. You've been a part of CLA, a very vital part, and I've seen you interact with other CEOs and the kind of quality of conversation that occurs. What do you think the future of a CEO-led organization can be in solving some of these long-term systemic issues in America and specifically in Orange County?
Mark, I think it's critical. CEOs are people of influence. People of influence have to care about the future versus just short-term self-interest, that long view. And you guys have done a phenomenal job convening the leaders of Orange County here, our backyard, our community. And I think the community approach to solving problems and generational improvement is critical here. And what's really cool about the CLA experience for me, and I'm kind of, I'm now a year and a half into the organization. It's a relatively young organization here in Orange County. But what's really cool about it is you're seeing that common thread of leaders here that really do care. They do care about broader issues than just their vertical, right? And what we're doing here, what you guys have set up, you, Dick, Doug, is getting everyone together to start having the conversations. And I think, we're tackling, just for everyone on the call, for context purposes, CLA is a group of CEOs that are working on, innovation in Orange County through a flywheel, education, recruitment, bringing capital into the market here, so that 20, 30, 40 years from now, we're thriving and we're not left in the old economy. We have AI activated here. We have great diversity of thinking and ideas here seeded to start great entrepreneurs. We're trying to eventually address, hopefully, the affordability issue in Orange County to make sure entrepreneurs could thrive here as well too. So in short, I think CEOs being people of influence, that through their institutions and through their friends and through their outward facing communications, convening them, having the trust built and the trust on intent in knowing that these people care, and having them come together against different verticals in different parts of the world, different ideas to help solve these issues is critical.
That's great.
So I have to ask a slightly selfish question, but I think it's quite important. What do you think is the role of education or education institutions such as mine and others in this process of developing generational leaders?
In all candor, Dean Williamson, it's something I really believe in humility of learning, and life is the most people I admire are just the most curious and the biggest learners. I'm learning about education. After 20 years of being MIA with UCI, or 18 years or whatever it was, I activated with UCI CEO Roundtable, now the School of Arts, and I'm amazed and fascinated by the system, the org design, the tie to the state from a budgeting standpoint. And I love the business aspect of it, how we make it more effective. And the more I learn, the more humbled I am. There are some amazing, UCI blows my mind in terms of what I'm seeing, how well run these different schools are. and the types of people that are activated from the community engaging. And it goes to your question, I'm coming at it from a side angle here, is it's everything. If we are not investing in the next generations in terms of education, what happens to economic mobility? What happens to the trajectory of people that didn't have the luxuries that I did, for example, of leaving Iran and coming here and being able to start over again in a very nice area where I had opportunity and I knew people. And I think the more I'm seeing the role of a hub like UCI in Orange County, the more I realize how important it is. Companies like ours recruit from UCI. Companies like ours could work to collaborate and do research with UC Irvine. Some of my work in human trafficking, our executive director of Willow, the human trafficking platform that I helped found, she's getting her master's there. And so it's critical. I'm early in the journey in learning more and more about it to see how I could be helpful and how it could be even more effective. But that is where I think the values formation happens. I think students, it's when you're testing, learning, trying things, making mistakes. And through that journey is where you realize who you are. And I think through good stewardship of good deans and good teachers and in a good culture and good values, I think we start building tomorrow's generational leaders.
I think Dean Williamson, also what you are bringing to the table with your expertise in talent, the talent pipeline, is speaking to all the companies as part of CLA, because that is a major focus. It's really retaining and developing talent. Too many companies are recruiting from the outside. They're not really asking the question about entry-level positions. How many Orange County students are we interviewing for those positions? What can we train up at entry level? Or are we always recruiting from the outside with 3 to 5 years experience? So there's a whole shift going on. And I think your arrival in Orange County at this particular time, with your way of connecting business education, with the community, that is the magic formula, is really taking the talent that we have in Orange County, which tends to be highly diverse, and making sure that those innovation jobs that Reza talked about, there's a pathway for that population. So we don't want segregated innovation, the way it is in a lot of other parts of the country. We really want a thriving OC for all, which is the vision of CLA. And again, we look forward to working with you. We're thinking about all sorts of research projects we can do with your students, and we're really excited about what you bring to the table in Orange County.
Well, Mark, I'm really appreciative of that, and Reza, I really appreciate your comments. And certainly, I think that I certainly feel a responsibility as a leader in an education institution for us to be actively thinking through and addressing the issues that you've identified. And that issue around trust is, I agree with you, actually. I think that is probably one of the most challenging issues we are facing. And it's not just a US issue. I actually have been quite interested in this issue of trust for several years now. And looking at the level of trust that individuals have in society more broadly, globally. And what we've seen in most countries is a big decline. So certainly the United States has seen a big decline, but in most countries, you've actually seen a big decline more broadly. And one of the things that as a business professor I'm interested in is also the research that we have seen around the impact of trust on economic growth and economic development. And what you see is as you get trust to decline within the society, you tend to also see a decline or greater challenges around economic prosperity. Simply put, people feel less and less comfortable making investments, less and less comfortable thinking about things in longer term frames to think about returns on investments. And as a result, it just leads to molasses, if you like, of slowing everything down. And so it is something that is quite critical. And long before I think, we think through some of the other complexities that we'll have to face as all societies do, that one has to be one that's at the front and center. And I guess I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming into the Q&A, and I should stress to all the participants today that if you do have any questions, please put them in the question and answer box so we can get to those. And I appreciate the ones that have already done so. But I've seen 2 questions that have already come in that really resonated around your point around trust and understanding how individuals, but particularly students, particularly our lead students, can play a role and have a meaningful contribution in addressing some of the trust issues that we're seeing in society. And Reza, Mark, did you have any thoughts or advice you might provide the students around what they can be doing to help address this critical challenge?
I'll use a little tip we've utilized in our business realm. In 2012, I was introduced to a concept of organizational health, which Dean Williamson, I'm sure you're very familiar with your HR background in terms of what you studied. And it's not just about how smart you are at what you do in your trade, but how you guys work together, how you behave as a team for a management team in the corporate context. And so we went through a series of therapy sessions, more or less, and we worked. And we use somebody by the name of Pat Lencioni. He's written a bunch of books. He's really well known. He helped shape Southwest culture. Some companies are really well known for good organizational culture and org health. At the very foundation of working organizational health, it's trust. From there, it's constructive conflict. From there, it's accountability all the way up to results in that, again, the organizational setting. In that bottom piece of Maslow's there of org health, that trust piece, getting the question of the student, Dean Williamson, it's literally sitting there with open ears and an open heart and understanding where someone's coming from, just understanding their story. Immediately, the perception changes when you start having context of what the person's life journey was, and empathy shows up. And then you start understanding that the intent is aligned with you. They want better for the organization as well, too. There's just triggers going on and patterns, human patterns going on. So I think the tip for me on trust is with fellow students, always give people the benefit of the doubt and learn with an open heart and listening ears, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, that's great, Reza. And the only thing I would add is that I think it's important. We've never been in a time where diversity of viewpoints is going to be more important for innovation. And I know for a fact that every CEO that's part of CLA is very interested in this issue. And you can't name a field where there exists a situation where underrepresented people are not, are minimized at the table. It has to change, and everyone understands that. And so the important thing, I think, is to be authentic and be truthful and to find your voice and do it as quickly as possible. Get to the point. Reza kind of talked about his journey of getting past fear, and I think we all have to do that. But I would encourage you to, find your ability to push yourself, to learn, to strive, to ask the questions, and to find where you interact with your world and where your proper place is. And if you go into a company or an organization, do the same thing, be authentic. And just because the need is more than ever for diversity of views in order to come up with more creative solutions, and we need creative solutions. So that will, I think, help build trust and authenticity in organizations.
So I might expand on that a little bit, because I think clearly this issue of how we create organizations that are engaging, inclusive, and exciting for individuals from a wide variety of backgrounds and communities is right on the top of mind of every executive that I've talked to, certainly in the last 2 years. And there's this interesting almost contrast around an appreciation for the societal importance of that, the innovation importance associated with that, but then a concern that many of the executives face around the challenges that they perceive or anticipate around conflict or disagreement or having the right communication such that it does not alienate. And so there's this interesting position that they're oftentimes placing around this topic. And I'd just be curious, your thoughts around how you navigate that. Is that a concern? Is that a fair characterization? Is it a point counterpoint or a con and a pro and a consequence? Is that even the appropriate way to frame this conversation? So what is your approach into this broader issue of how we think about running organizations that celebrate the diversity of the communities that we are in?
You know, Dean Williamson, this is a boulder we have to work on right now, and we're at an inflection point. And this is a tough conversation, and this goes back to just listening and getting perspective of people that you work with, work for you, or in your community. And I think for us as a society right now, this whole trust issue, the exercise, especially against all this information coming at us, if you're on social media and apps and, you know, just information overload, which we were not put on this earth to process. You don't know how to weight the information, you know. I think it's about aligning on values. Having the tough conversations with your peers, with people that you work with, that work for you, and work the sense making. We're all in the sense making journey, right? And say, what do we want? What do we all want? We want to have thriving communities and companies and institutions for all. The starting point, you know, there was dynamics with our history, you know, as a globe, let alone this country. And those are tough things to navigate through. So I think in one sense, we have to give people grace on every side, on both sides of this conversation. We can't alienate people that slip up and they're done. They're human beings working their reflection and introspective journey. And we also can't shut people down that are having a lot of feelings right now, you know, and we have to come to the table aligning on what we want for our kids and the next generations and as a country, and breaking through the partisanship and the rhetoric and the digging your heels in, because that's not how humans are wired. I don't agree with, you know, half the things on one side of the political spectrum and half the things with others. I'm a human being. I have, you know, I'm socially like this. So I think I don't have an answer, but I think right now it's some grace and empathy and open ears and open hearts, and then working around what we want for our institutions and our country, and having those discussions and finding commonality to build the trust and then build from there.
Yeah,
Thank you, Reza.
I think a corporate culture goes a long way. And when you see a really good CEO, we had Mike Masalam from Edwards talk to us. We have learning experiences once a year, and we go in depth into different issues and the culture that the CEOs create. And, you know, Edwards has done a tremendous job. Mike is an incredible leader. And, you know, to be able to have the kind of innovation and to get the best out of all their employees, that's true leadership. And I think it's funny as we go into work from anywhere kind of a world, so-called, that's going to be one of the issues I think that will bring people back to the office, back to the hybrid model. But it's going to be very hard for companies to create a strong corporate culture around the kind of trust you're talking about and allowing a voice for everyone and true innovation to flourish in a remote world, a completely remote world. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the coming months as each company decides what's the right formula for them.
And Dean Williamson, one other plug here. I don't think it's just socioeconomic, race. I think gender. I think we have a generational issue as well too. You know, and especially in tough times, the generational way of thinking that's different amongst generations, that dynamic exacerbates. It gets highlighted and augmented. And I think we're facing some of that as well too. And we have to have that same kind of approach from generational empathy and openness and grace as well too.
So we had a question building on this from Kimberly, who asked, what's the secret to getting people to letting down their guard and allowing themselves to be vulnerable so they can begin to lead with their hearts or around their values? And I'd be curious what your experiences, either of you, have had around that, or maybe the other way around, when you've had leaders that you've been around that create that space for you where you felt comfortable letting down your guard, and what they did around that.
This is I'm babbling a lot, so this one will be a punchy vulnerability. I think you lead with vulnerability and you are willing to expose yourself a little bit, and that's leading. And I think that really opens up and is fertile ground for someone else being vulnerable as well too. And I think generally speaking, paired with vulnerability, authenticity, when someone knows you're being authentic, it really does make them feel more comfortable. You know, that's energetic in my opinion, and people then are more open with their own vulnerabilities and to work the trust bridge.
Yeah, I found it took me a long time to learn that people don't connect strength to strength often. People actually connect weakness to weakness. And unless you're willing to show vulnerability, and when you do, it's amazing how those personal connections can be enhanced and trust can be built. But we live in a world where we think we have to have it all together and we have to be strong all the time. And that's not the formula for, trusting relationships.
Yeah, I would chime in and completely agree. One of my more recent research projects looked at the formation of trust in teams and organizations. And the key takeaway I took from all of that research is that as a child, we were told something that probably is not helpful. Many of us were told that we have to earn the trust of others. And I know my parents said that to me many times. And you want to do that? You got to earn my trust first. And as it turns out, when you look at the human experience, that's not how trust is formed at all. Trust is given, it is never earned. Because when trust is earned, that's actually called a contract. And that's when we call our lawyer. And usually if we're calling our lawyer, it's because we don't have trust in the other party. Yeah. And it's actually when one party makes themselves vulnerable to the other, and the other party reciprocates by not taking advantage of that vulnerability, that trust is formed between individuals. And that's whether we're talking about, asking someone out for a date or asking someone at work a question about a particularly challenging issue. It's the vulnerability that exposes the human connection that we share. It is not the fact that someone has earned the right for me to now show you that I'm a human. That's not how it actually works for effective relationships. So yeah, I think it's not the way we were typically taught. We were taught it was supposed to be earned, but in fact, that is the way it actually plays out. We're changing tacks a little bit. There's a question about ESG investing and whether or not it's a fad or not. Is this something that's substantive? And I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that particular question.
You want me to jump in because I mentioned ESG? I think the answer is yes and no. I think there are people involved in the ESG realm that are trying to get better returns, that are not doing it for a noble reason, that are doing it because it'll get them in the good graces of their LPs and the media or whatever their perverse intention is. And I have no idea if that's the majority or the minority of people in the ESG world. But I do think there are the authentic people that are generational leaders that are figuring out asset aggregation vehicles or capital aggregation vehicles to make investments focused on solving societal problems. And you're getting some really good outcomes from a lot of the companies that are being invested in that are, and this is still relatively early days. ESG has been around for a bit. It's still early days in terms of outcomes and returns. So I think the answer is both. I don't think there's anything necessarily negative about it. I think those people would be ferreted out over the long haul that weren't doing it for the right reason, because I think they'll make the wrong investments. And it's again, that alignment of values issue that'll over time show.
Reza, I'd like to ask you, AAG is one of the most successful private companies in Orange County, and you're the founder, CEO. I wonder if some of the questions we're talking about here, purposeful leadership, is easier in a private company versus a public company. And I wonder if you feel a little bit more freedom and in control of your destiny, because a lot of these issues we're talking about are long-term issues. And when you're quarterly in a public company, and I've worked in a public company, it is different. And a private company is a very unique structure. I wonder what your experience is.
That's a great one, Mark. My personal view on this is it's tough being a public company CEO. It's not easy. We've had those discussions with my company. I'm not raising my hand saying, talking to bankers and whatnot, or even SPACs, that I want to be a public company CEO. Mm-hmm. And part of this is this structural dynamic that we're talking about, that you're alluding to. Public companies historically have been punished if they're not growing and not making money. And I know with the tech.com advent in the new tech world, there's a ramp up of companies that are just growing top line or revenue or other metrics that don't have earnings, and now it's more accepted. Notwithstanding that component, generally speaking, there's tension when your investors, analysts, are putting pressure on you to deliver results this month, this quarter, or even this year, because good things happen with long-term thinking and planning and courage. The short-term gratification that comes from earnings you may not be steering the ship in the right direction, so to speak, the right coordinates. Mm-hmm. You may go on less choppy waters in the short term, but eventually you're going to end up at the wrong destination. And I think I don't have an answer to this, Mark. Yeah, I'm not saying let's abandon the public company construct, and I'm probably exaggerating to make a point right now. But I think this is more about having these discussions in the CLA format and having them with other leaders and in this forum, so that there's a cultural shift. So we start having other people of influence and leaders start really working to support, multi-constituent models of what they actually align their purpose around versus just money as the number one metric. And I think that just over time, it's going to be a cultural shift as you have more conversations with your peers and others, and realize that that's a better outcome for society.
Reza, I might just add a point on that. I think it is interesting. We talk about long-term or short-term. Ultimately, that's a conversation not about time, but it's a conversation about what we've deemed as being legitimate metrics of success. Because, the determination as to what we think is success shapes the time frame. And if we only limit it to a particular monetary outcome, well, we know there's ways to rig that game in a lot of different ways, sometimes above board or not. But if we were to sort of use other metrics of success, or in fact have a portfolio metric of success, then the whole perspective of time changes dramatically. And it is interesting how we can think about things in terms of public companies around share price and the like, but by the same token, we're quite comfortable speaking to individuals around the values of buying a piece of physical asset and depreciating it over a 20-year period and being comfortable with that whole logic. So it's not that we are incapable of thinking about time and thinking about the value that can generate over time, as much as we tend to be very limited in the portfolio of success criteria that we use. And so maybe the question I would have to you is, you've sort of used the term generational leadership, which suggests that the success of these individuals cannot be captured unless we think about it over at least one generation. How do you think organizations what they should be using around the metrics that they use for success if they are themselves going to consider purpose as being a core component of what they do?
That was actually, I should be asking you questions, Dean Williamson, because that was really well said. I'm humbled that you're asking me that question. So I first of all, I completely agree with you. It's what is the definition of success and what are we measuring? And it's the paradigm shift of our old views and realizing what's better for us all as a society or the organization. I'll start and do a cheat on the organizational front. I think you could start, by the way, I wanted to say this earlier. When I say purpose-driven businesses for the more noble why, I didn't start, even though I accidentally ended up being in a social impact type of business. I initially was not purpose-driven. That was not my why. Like I said, it was other things like fear and whatnot. But you don't have to be solving all sorts of social issues with a corporation, with a company you lead. You could be solving a problem for consumers. Your employees could be part of your purpose and how you treat them. Creating avenues to give back with your employees could be part of your purpose. You could have success and what you do and how you activate could be part of your purpose. With that said, and I'm not zigzagging to get to the answer, Dean Williamson, I think corporations right now do better when they do add the purpose part to begin with. And that piece has to be better communicated in the loud mic, so to speak. We're having better engagement numbers, better bottom line numbers. We're having better cultural ranks and reviews, personal employee fulfillment marks, all better. I see it ourselves, how sticky the culture is when you actually have a downturn in the market, people staying with you, you don't have as much attrition. So I think there's a self-serving aspect, even for the shareholders and everybody involved, to line on more of a purpose framework. That's the easy, cheap, way. For the tougher discussions to be had in, for example, the public company context setting, where you have people breathing down your throat for financial results, that generational leadership piece and making sure you start having in your mind, in your discourse, the concept of the values alignment of what do you want for this organization? Do you want it to do well for 5 years? And eventually I have to lay a bunch of people off, or we lose money or whatever? Or do you want us to be here for 50 years or 100 years? And that conversation should be being had at the federal government and the state government level. The most challenging, I interact with federal government, it is tough. Talk about structural deficits and lack of alignment issues. There's also, the focus is mostly self-preservation and having to appease whatever party you're in to make sure you can get a committee position, or you're not booted out, or you can keep raising money. I think the leaders that really could speak to bringing people together, build the trust bridge, and get us, around a vision that matches our values and work the sense-making process, I think that's a solution. More leaders, people of influence, work in that problem.
Hey, Reza, I got to get this in before we end. I saw that AAG was one of the top 50 places to work for a large company category. And what stood out for me was in two groups: best company for women and best company for diversity. So was that something you specifically went after in terms of a plan to build your talent out that way? How did that evolve?
Thanks for that plug. We're very proud of being a best workplace. I think it's been, I don't know if it's 7 or 8 years running. Don't quote me on that, for Orange County. And we have it in New York and other places too. The best workplaces, I think, has a lot to do with this, everyone aligning, and my team gets a ton of credit for that, around something more meaningful and knowing we're here to help seniors first and do it ethically, and everything else comes after that, and money will follow. The movement on the focus on women and diversity, it's been an area I've under-indexed in. I've been bad at it. And I've been focused on it more so the last 4 or 5 years, not 15 years ago. And I'm starting to, the more conversations I have, the more I learn of what's going on. We happen to be a very diverse company because we set the tone at the top to make sure you're hiring people based on the merits and nothing else. And that naturally happened here. We're now putting way more affirmative initiatives together to make sure we're looking at diversity metrics. We're looking at women and promotions and how to work with women that are dealing with having a child and the disadvantages that they have, those dynamics. And we're still early in the curve, but I'm very proud that we're starting to get recognized for those efforts, and that's being shown there.
Well, I'm mindful of time, and we may not have enough time for, maybe we can sneak in one more question. There's a question from Tony, which I think is a timely one, and maybe we can get a quick answer to it. Is, what advice would you have for students who see themselves as generational leaders, but might feel pressures to take an entry-level role that might not fit their long-term vision of purposeful work? How should they balance that tension? And I think we can all relate to that particular situation, and it's probably not just for those young entry-level people either. So any parting comments or words you might provide around that particular question from Tony?
Great. That's a very relevant question. I'll try to be quick on this. Be patient. The journey is not always a straight line. And I think finding your authentic passion, your talents, your voice, most importantly, what you value, what you care about, it takes time and it's a journey. And through adversity and challenge, those are opportunities for growth. And part of the challenge could be taking a non-purposeful, purpose-driven job to begin with, because that's where you are in life and that's the job you can get right now. That helps shape character. It'll help you, you'll have more of a yearning as you're learning skills and become more marketable to then pivot when it's the right time to do something with more purpose. Not everybody can wave a magic wand and end up at an area in a company or organization that's solving these huge social issues. Just the world doesn't work that way. And I think stay self-aware and be relentless about reflection along the way. And if you get to a point where you're not fulfilled and happy, it's time for a change.
Thank you. Well, I might just take a moment there to stop the discussion, offer my thanks and appreciation, Reza, for your time, your insight, for your openness. I think others would certainly have appreciated just the candor of your conversation today. And certainly I can appreciate what that would look like on a day-to-day basis in your organization. And I'm sure that many of the people there would really appreciate that about your character. Mark, I also would just like to acknowledge you and the efforts that you're taking more broadly in CLA to enhance the outcomes that we have here in Orange County, and your willingness to spend some time with that next generation of people we're trying to prepare Orange County for, the lead students that we have with us. I should take a moment to also thank all the individuals, and there are several, who are involved in organizing today's events, both from the student side, but also from the Paul Merage side, but also from the Paul Merage supporter side. It took a lot to get the individuals that we have together, gathered virtually in this particular space today. And so as a dean on behalf of the Merage School, I really would like to just acknowledge all of your efforts in putting this all together for what has been, for at least me personally, a really engaging, very insightful conversation tonight. And I guess if I had to summarize or to wrap up some of our conversations, I think one big thing that I would take from this is this challenge for us to think of ourselves and develop ourselves into being generational leaders. And I think that is something that is a very noble purpose for us. I think it is an appropriate calling for the talents and skills that all of us have been blessed to have, and certainly the opportunities we've had through our educational experiences. But I also think it's a challenge for us to think through about how we use our professional careers as a pathway to do that, and to not adopt a sequential approach towards purpose, where we do some work, make some money, and after we've made enough, go back to doing the thing that we thought was really important. And instead remind ourselves that perhaps the greatest thing that we will be able to contribute to our community is actually our talent. It's actually our skill. It's actually not our money. And if we can combine that with what we do as a professional, then I think this is where you get the biggest flow-on effects. And certainly that sounds like some of the model that we've heard tonight, and something for us all to reflect on. So on behalf of the school, thank you everyone for your time and your attention this evening. I hope you found this conversation engaging and delightful. Reza, Mark, again, thank you for your support, and I look forward to engaging with you both in the future and hosting all of you in future events like this. Everyone have a great evening.